Sociopolitical organization. So for this lecture, we're really going to focus on some key questions. The first one is, what is sociopolitical organization? The next one is, how is order maintained within a culture? How is order maintained between cultures? And how do political systems obtain people's allegiance? So let's get into sociopolitical organization. It involves the means a community uses to maintain social order and reduce social disorder. It is an exercising of power and regulation of relations among groups and their representatives. Very much sociopolitical organization is dealing with trying to deal with conflict resolution. So basically trying to settle disputes, settle conflict within that particular community, society. All human groups have some sort of socio-political organization. And the differences in socio-political organizations depend a lot on the environment that community is located in. And then also when we talk about socio-political organization, we're also talking a lot about power, legitimacy, and authority. All socio-political organizations deal with power, legitimacy, and authority. Power is the ability to exercise one's will over another, or over others. Authority is the formal, socially approved use of that power. And legitimacy is the popular acceptance of an authority. So when we're talking about power, legitimacy, and authority, we also need to talk about norms. And norms are the cultural standards or guidelines that enable individuals to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate behavior in a given society. So norms are sort of the cultural standards of what is normal, what is appropriate. And these can be legally sanctioned, so there's laws for norms, as well as sort of just social norms, sort of what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and anything else that's outside of a norm is seen as being deviant or abnormal or wrong. It's important again to state that norms are incredibly wide-ranging, meaning that not only are norms very diverse across different communities, so the way that one person might think of an appropriate behavior in one community will be very different probably from another community, but even within large communities, so such as even like in states like United States, norms are, what's normal, what's not, what's appropriate, what's not. There is definitely a lot of variation. One example that we can talk about for a norm, just to sort of get this more familiar to you, is that in the United States, but in pretty much, I believe, almost every country, there's a social norm as well as a legally norm that one should not marry their child, meaning that parents or biological parents particularly cannot marry and be in a romantic or reproductive relationship with their child. And that's, of course, there's laws in the United States that you know that makes it illegal, but also there's a huge social taboo, obviously. Another norm that's not legally sanctioned, but something that I think is very apparent in the West as well, especially here in the United States, is about what's appropriate for boys and girls. So one is that young boys should never wear pink dresses, and little girls should not wear boys' clothes. And boys' clothes, I mean like very stereotypical, like blue shorts. Girls should be wearing dresses, and boys should be wearing work pants or something like that. It's a division between what is appropriate for young boy, male-bodied children should wear, and what's appropriate for young girl children to wear, or female-bodied children to wear. But again, though, that norm is also being challenged, particularly even now in American pop culture, about that these sort of gender norms between boys should not be feminine and wear pink, and girls should not be masculine and wear blue to, play sports. these are being challenged. So again, norms are also very diverse as well. Okay. And while rules and norms are found universally in all cultures, only in state societies, those with state governments, have formal regulations, i.e., laws, that are there to reinforce, regulate norms and rules. And there's four sort of basic kinds of socio-political organizations. One is sort of uncentralized, being bands and tribes, and the other one is centralized, which is chiefdoms and states. Today, bands, tribes, and chiefdoms have to operate within nation states and are subject to state control. They cannot practice their socio-political organization without state intervention. So this gets to really kind of the difficulty about talking about the differences in socio-political organization, being that as much as there are differences between bands, tribes, chiefdoms, and states, there are also kind of ideal types, meaning that there's as much as, we talk about differences, there's also a lot of blending in between, as well as that, nowadays, because of globalization, a lot of these communities that maybe were traditionally bands or tribes or even chiefdoms are now in larger nation states. So they can't really practice their social political sort of organization as they once had before. So again, when we're talking about bands, tribes, chiefdoms, and states, we are talking about idealized types. So meaning that they don't really fully exist in reality, but they are the sort of key characteristics of these socio-political organizations. So that's bands. Bands are mostly in foraging, hunting, and fishing societies. And typically they're a small group of related families in a region that come together during particular times of the year, such as spring, and then separate into smaller groups during the winter, or vice versa. A big thing about bands is that there's no sort of, it's very much an informal leadership, meaning that there are no formal centralized political systems. Instead, authority is distributed among the group. Sometimes authority is distributed very evenly. Sometimes it is distributed differently depending on the gender and the age and maybe the particular position of certain individuals. And right there, the picture down below is a community, and Inuits were typically, before colonization, were a band-like community where they would come together during sort of the height of the fishing season, and then they would kind of spread out after the fishing season. Now going on to tribes. Tribes mostly are formed out of pastoral and horticultural economy. And they're a group of communities in a region sharing a common culture and integrated by a particular unifying factor. They also have a higher population density than bands, so there's more people. They don't have a formal government or means of enforcing political decisions, but they do have sort of a leadership. But again, these leaders have limited authority. And most of the sort of the community structure is organized around kinship and descent. And we're going to talk about kinship and descent in the weeks coming up. There's also usually a big emphasis on age organization, so specific age groups, so whether that's like child, young adult, teenager, adult, elderly, are given particular political functions. Getting onto chiefdoms, chiefdoms are really described as sort of kind of like a regional polity under a ruler from a ranked hierarchy of people. So chiefdoms administer a permanent sort of regional political system that includes thousands of people living in many villages. So it's kind of like a central authority over diverse villages within that community. And within chiefdoms, social status is based on the seniority of your descent and as well as your gender. And power is hereditary inherited, meaning that your power gets sort of where you are in position to authority based on who your father was, or who, who are you descended from, right? Oftentimes it is unstable and it's prone to what we call social stratification. And what social stratification is that is basically differences in status, power, or privilege for some groups over others. Now we get onto the state. States are kind of defined primarily by how power is centralized in a central government. It uses a legalized use of force. So unlike bands and tribes that use a kind of cultural, social use of force, states use sort of rules and regulations that are followed by everyone. And it's a legalized form. Like chiefdoms, states are also very much a tendency towards instability and can change often. They are also usually multinational. And there's a difference between when we think about nation and state. So a state is a government entity. And I use the national emblem of the United States, but you can also talk about the Soviet Union as a state. You can talk about North Korea as a state. You can talk about, but really what it is a government entity, regardless of what sort of line of power, whether it's a dictatorship to a democracy to anything else in that whole spectrum. But a state is the government entity, whereas a nation is the communities of people who see themselves as sharing a culture, a history, a language, and an identity. So when we talk about United States of America, one part is that we are talking about this sort of government entity of the United States of America. But when we talk about our nation, we're talking about culture. We're talking about our social society beliefs, our shared history of living and raised in America, as well as our shared language and identity as like an American citizen. Today there are about 181 states, but over 5,000 nations. And there actually are a lot of nations within a state. So the United States, there are many nations actually within the United States of America, such as there's many indigenous nations, so Native American nations within the. So again, when I was talking about it, I was talking that these sort of social political differences between bands and tribes and chiefdoms and states, that they are ideal types. But if you had to sort of put a division between the two sort of groups, one would be that bands and tribes don't have a central authority. Again, there's no sort of like head chief, right? There's no leader in the sense of one person holding the authority. Instead, it's usually formed by either the whole community or a council of select individuals. And even then, that's sort of blurry. Whereas chiefdom in states, authority with power is sort of centralized, either to an individual or into a government entity. And that is used to regulate people's actions. But both with bands and tribes and chiefdoms and states, they do share particular ways of social control. One is internalized control. So that's sort of control due to internalized beliefs and values. So, the idea of that, it's a way to sort of to regulate and to deter antisocial behavior. So an internalized control is the idea of, incest being disgusting or unnatural. And your fear of, deformity, disease, and death that goes along with incest, as well as, the moral implications to even, for some communities, incest involve the consequences of incest involves, ghosts or supernatural consequences. And that's an internalized control, meaning that these are sort of the internal beliefs and cultural beliefs that make you regulate yourself. Externalized control is about social control through outside actors on you. So again, punishment and privileges. So it's an open coercion by people within your community or authorities. So, such as laws and rules against drunk driving, right? You know, if a person is caught driving drunk, they can face jail time, you know, all of these aspects, right? So it's an externalized control. And now we get to the last part, which is key terms. So first one is socio-political organization, which involves the means a community uses to maintain social order and reduce social disorder or social conflict. Conflict resolution is the methods of settling disputes within communities. Power is the ability to exercise one's will over others. Authority is the formal, socially approved use of power. Legitimacy is the popular acceptance of an authority. Norms are the cultural standards or guidelines that enable individuals to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate behavior in any given society. And then internalized control is the control due to sort of internalized belief and values. Externalized control is the social control through direct political action, so outside actors controlling individuals through punishment and privileges. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you next class.